I think that they've worked out that I was using that as a crutch because that was benefit was getting a burger for lunch and then also getting my milk for the rest of the week.
This week in e-commerce, episode 118. I am Mal Cheer, and back with me for the last episode, her last episode of the year, is Alex Ross. Alex, how are you?
I'm good, Mal. Yeah, last episode of the year. Very excited.
Yeah, you're off on vacation, I hear.
Yes, off to Japan tomorrow. Few days in Tokyo, couple in Mount Fuji, and then spending most of the time skiing or snowboarding in Hakuba.
Excellent. So while you're going to be enjoying a white Christmas, we will be sweating it out here. Although I did see the long range forecast and it does not appear to be a very hot Christmas. I think it's only going to be like 22, which is, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that.
I saw that. I think it's a shame when you can't, sweat it out by the pool on Christmas Day.
Yeah, I do like the 40-degree or high use Christmas.
Yeah. You want to go one extreme or the other. You want a hot Christmas or a white Christmas for sure.
That's right. So everyone here, you'll have to put up with just me next week. And then we'll be taking a week off. I will be playing a replay from our favorite episode of the year. And then we'll be back fresh in the new year.
Yeah, lots to look forward to coming into 2026.
Certainly is. All right. And we are going to kick off with our quickies for the week. And the first one is a stat from Australia Post, who recorded their busiest day ever. They have estimated that in a single day, $1.5 billion was spent during Black Friday. What do you think about that number? It's a gigantic number.
It's a massive number. I found the stat of that 1.5 bill is shared over 3.1 million Australian households to be very interesting. I haven't done the AOV, but it sounds pretty healthy.
That is $483 average per person.
Yeah, that feels correct.
Yeah, I bought a little bit, but I didn't buy $483 worth.
Well, then there you go. I exceeded. So we've come together.
Hence why it's an average.
Yeah, I think I would have hit maybe 700-800.
Yeah, that's a huge number, which is, which I guess it's good. Like a lot of people were buying over that period. And like we've talked about before, from the sounds of things, most retailers had a pretty decent Black Friday. But what do you think this kind of signals to where we are at in the market?
I think it's that it's signifying that we as a nation are now we're really focused on Black Friday, where we're seeing a lot of that spend come into 3 or 4 days, up 9.2% year on year for Australia's Post recording anyway. So we are buying into the sales cycle.
Look, and the other part of this report as well is that it exceeded any pandemic era peaks. So no day during the pandemic actually matched this at all, which, rather than the demand curve kind of flattening out, the demand curve is very much focused on a single period of the year, which is a scary thought, as we've talked about before, that you're going to have 360 days or so of very average demand just building up towards just this one period.
Yeah, and a lot of work for Australia Post to have to accommodate that amount of traffic for just a short period of time.
Yeah, Australia Post, but also retailers as well, who are scrambling. And I know a number who are still scrambling to catch up on Black Friday orders because they were so far behind, either because they were out of stock and needed to manufacture new stock, or they just cannot keep up with it. So it just shows again that, demand forecasting is so important to be able to do.
And difficult to manage where there's such highs and then such lows.
Yeah, especially from a cash flow perspective. Rather than expecting regular cash flow, your cash flow is now tied up in a single month, particularly if you are making mistakes along the way, such as overbuying. And we're going to get to a story about that later on as well. But it does mean that it's going to be tougher than ever for retailers if you can't maintain consistent demand the other 360 days of the year. And following on from this as well is that in the similar report, Australia Post have also said that the fastest growing category is activewear. So they found that activewear growth was much bigger than any other category. And this again didn't really surprise me because every single activewear brand I saw was going on sale. Even ones who had previously only done short sales, they were suddenly doing very, very long sales. So I think it's holding even more true for them that they're struggling to keep up with demand, to generate demand during the year, and having to use this period to go heavy on promotions.
Yeah, and it seems like a relatively low seasonal vertical, if that makes sense. I think you can rely on having your black pair of tights the full year round. So as we've spoken about before, great time to stock up on those. And so that makes sense when you talk about the athleisure being the leader in that sales period.
But it's hard to say that it's interesting that you see that this while the category has grown though, brands themselves aren't actually don't appear to be growing in the sense that they're not able to be able to sell outside of this period. So they're having to be more promotion focused. So really, is there a leader in this space anymore if everyone's having to focus more and more on promotions? And again, this is another one we're going to talk about later on about Lululemon, but it's just again seems that a lot of these brands, as more and more flood into the market, are starting to lose their competitive edge if customers are just waiting now for this period to sell, to buy.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. And the next quickie, Woolworths have announced that they're expanding their partnership with DoorDash to be able to provide last mile convenience for customers, obviously at a bit of a premium. So to be able to get their products straight to you via an Uber, which we've talked about very often before, particularly through JB Hi-Fi. But it's interesting that they've kind of both put their flag in the ground with one choosing DoorDash and then the other choosing Uber Eats.
Well, yeah, this article read. I thought it was quite funny to read in the sense that Coles is already on DoorDash, and now Woolworths is on DoorDash, and so Coles is pulling off of DoorDash but going to Uber Eats. But what it sounded like to me was Woolworths will remain on Uber Eats. So it sounds like out of all of this, Coles is the one that has lost a channel, and Woolworths has now gone even further.
Yeah, interesting. I think I missed that part of the article, but I think you're right. Like, if that's the case, like, why would you take yourself off this channel? Particularly if customers have the choice of just choosing, one or the other. But I wonder whether this is also going to be when you buy direct from them as well. You have the option of getting it immediately through from the Coles or Woolworth website rather than through the Uber Eats app. Because when you buy through any of the apps, it is a much more limited assortment than what's available from directly from the website, from what I understand.
Yeah, and that was one of the value props was Coles is now opening up thousands of more products available on Uber Eats. So it's something like 19,000 products. I don't think that's per store what you can expect, but just generally they're recognizing that normally it is quite limited. So how do we get one up the other providers, having more products available on the apps?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with Coles as well, they've seen a lot of growth in their online delivery over the last 12 months. That's continued to grow. And I think this will continue to help that as well. But it's that behavior as well, where we're switching from being shoppers who will buy one big shop or potentially two big shops a week to now sort of doing these little convenient shops throughout the week. And I know that I like the big shop because I just like everything getting done now, and not having to kind of chase things throughout the week. But it does speak to a shifting consumer behavior that we're not doing that anymore. We're buying things as we need.
Yeah, it's I'm a shop as you go, which is terrible for the budget, but I just can't think what I want for dinner 6 days in advance. And if I do buy that, I don't want it by the time it rolls around. So wastage, organization kind of trade-off. But yeah, I think it just everything is more accessible depending on where you live. You don't need to be as prepared anymore.
But it's also much more expensive as well when you do buy through these other platforms. Like, they all put a markup on it. Then you've got the delivery cost as well. And in a cost of living crisis, you'd think that you'd want to behave the other way and look at how you save money. But if this is continuing to grow, we're suddenly spending a lot of our money on things which we shouldn't actually have to.
Well, we're spending our money on service fees to Uber and Uber Eats is what it feels like. I find this whole story interesting off the back of Woolworths acquiring Milk Run and using that as their instant delivery service, but still now choosing to be on Uber Eats as well. So to me, it sounds like people are paying the fees, so you've just got to be where your shoppers are.
Well, ultimately, Uber Eats and DoorDash have the network, particularly Uber Eats. So when you have that many eyeballs on there and that convenience, plus also that little handy feature where you can add something to it as well. And I have recently done that actually, when it was like a $0 delivery fee if I add something and I ran out of milk. It actually turned out pretty handy.
I think that they've worked out that I was using that, like I was relying on that as a crutch. So now I'm getting less frequently. Am I offered the do you need groceries for zero fees? Because that was the benefit was getting some getting a burger for lunch and then also getting my milk for the rest of the week.
Well, they know that you're going to pay for it. So they've probably just said, we're just going to make her pay for it. All right, getting into our deep dives. Our first one is an absolute doozy, and it's a brand which we've talked about quite a bit, which is Lululemon. And in last week, Calvin McDonald, who's been CEO for about 7 years or so, has announced that he will be exiting the company. At the same time, their founder, Chip Wilson, who was recently, not too long ago, actually pushed out of the company, has been publicly criticizing the leadership. And part of this is that Lululemon's growth, particularly relative to their two main competitors, which are Viore and Alo Yoga, has been very, very small. They've only grown about 5% in the last 12 months and only 2% growth in the US, which is still the biggest market. So Chip Wilson, the founder, has said that a lot of this has come down to the fact that Lulu has lost their edge. They've lost the edge on product, they've lost the edge on cultural relevance, and they've lost the soul of the brand.
Not to take away from the story too much, but what's your take on the founder, Chip, speaking ill of the brands in this sense? Because it doesn't sit right with me. I think that he should be lifting this brand up. I know he's being honest. It just seems unhelpful.
He's a very outspoken person anyway, and there's been no shortage of controversy which has followed Chip over the years. But I think in this case, he is right. It is something where he sees what this brand was created for. He did create it as a cultural icon, deliberately on the premiumness of the products, product innovation, the price, the scarcity. He was doing all these things, and to see it kind of erode would be would hurt you as the founder, to see that this thing which you built, not being what it is anymore, and seeing it lose its way as it become much more corporatized, I guess, over the last few years.
Yeah, I appreciate it's tough to watch. I also think it's interesting that the CEO's moved on without a replacement straight away. So the whole business is kind of left in limbo when they're more competitors than ever. It seems like a great time to kind of strike.
Exactly, and that's what Alo and Viore have been doing. They've been growing consistently. Alo, of course, we've talked about previously, have grown massively in the last couple of years. And part of it is that Lulu haven't really done a whole lot to shake up the industry. And what it looks like as well is that under the leadership of Calvin McDonald, who from all reports is a very good CEO and one who I actually looked up, respected for quite a long time, is that when you start to dig beneath the surface, it's kind of had this slow death over the last couple of years. And I use death very loosely because it's still a multi-billion dollar company, in the sense that they've become more and more corporate, been chasing those incremental improvements rather than doing things to actually take some big swings about how do we actually take it to the next level with the brand.
Yeah.
So with things like product, it's been very bland. Even when we talked about the NFL collaboration a couple of weeks ago, your observation was that it's just Lulu stuff it doesn't look any different to what you would buy from like a fan shop.
Yeah. It's a bit safe. And I think that their brand is pared back. So they're obviously struggling to deal with how far they can get out of the box, but they're going to have to do something.
Yeah, I think so too. I think as a brand, they need to do something to reinvent or revolutionize their positioning in this space, because they were the leader at one point. A lot of other brands are catching up at the moment, and they need to think about how they can actually become culturally relevant again. And while they still do work with quite a few fairly big name ambassadors, so do all the other brands as well. There's nothing cool anymore about Lulu where you look at them and think, they are still cutting edge. And sure, they still do have a little bit of that, but it's still not to the degree where it used to be. And part of the blame, I think, where this comes from is that they appointed, there was an article I read today about the Starbuckification, I think, of Lulu, where they brought in someone, the CFO came from Starbucks, who brought in an approach which ultimately ruined Starbucks, of, again, starting to cut out all those little things which made Starbucks special. By looking for those incremental margin improvements, it actually made the brand less sexy, less appealing. And like even their quality, their guarantee and their warranty, where you could return at any time, that actually started to change from being like, hey, if this product doesn't work for you 10 years later, we will replace it, to being within like a certain period. And there started to be more and more conditions put around that to protect margin.
Yeah, and that was always such a sell factor for me anyway, is that lifetime customer, and that's the value you get. Yeah, interesting that they're pulled back from that a bit.
Yeah, but I think moving forward, I hope they do bring on someone who is more brand conscious, who does want to bring that magic back to the brand, similar to what I think Nike are trying to do now, by bringing someone back in who understands the brand DNA, and how to make brands special again, not just look to improve margins.
Yeah. I feel like they could benefit from some localization as well. One of the best things about going to a Zara overseas is, they've got products that we don't have in Australia. Let's see what, Italy Zara has, or a different place. So they've got such a great store network and such a global customer, starting to lean into sporting events and sporting events locally. And I know they've done a bit of that with the NFL, but that could be a big opportunity for them.
I 100% agree with that. I think it'd be great to actually have products which are localized for a particular market, either through the designs, the patterns, or the product itself.
100%.
All right, and our last deep dive for the day is one from Rag Trader, which shows that Australian fashion retailers have slashed their inventory by up to 60%. Now, this is a huge number because and how this was done was that they looked at the inventory of different brands over the last number of years, and this year, what the inventory which most brands are actually holding, they've cut down quite dramatically. And a lot of this is response to the fact that in 2021, post-COVID, a lot of brands were well overstocked. They bought for COVID and a continued increase in online sales, which didn't necessarily come. But then also with the cost of living pressures, all the demand volatility we've seen over the last number of years, as well as the margin pressures from more discounting and higher overheads as well, shows that this is actually having a very, very material impact on how businesses are operating.
I thought you'd be very proud and pleased to see this story. I feel like this is what so many people talk about, is making sure you don't have dead stock. Stock just sitting in a warehouse is lost money. So it sounds like we're doing that. It just, maybe the pendulum swung a little bit too far now and there's nothing left.
This was actually quite a good story to see that people are being much more sensible with what they're buying. You also can run the risk of going too far the other way, where you don't have enough stock and then you suffer as a result. And there are a few brands which I know which have done that. But on the whole, I think this is a good move for people to actually be more accurate with their forecasting and their demand planning to ultimately protect their cash flow. Because if you don't have cash flow and it's tied up in dead stock, you're pretty much stuck unless you're borrowing.
Yeah. And to me, this goes, retailers have a better understanding of kind of like their ABCs of their stock. They're using tech, let's say Style Arcade, for example, to be smarter at what they're purchasing next. So it's a maturity of the market, and it's really good to see.
Yeah, it's great to see. The other thing though is that there is a risk to this as well, in that if you are too constrained, is that you may not start to actually go out and take risks with your designs, with what you're looking to buy. So it's always balancing that out as well. And one recommendation I've long had is that you spend 80% on your core, and then you spend 10%, 20% on exploration, figuring out where the next growth is going to come from. Because ultimately, if you are in fashion or apparel, it's that it is fashion, that things will come in and out of fashion, and you can't rely on the same 80% carrying your revenue now as it will be in 2 years. It needs to change. So you always need to be bringing in that newness, but it's how much you invest in that newness, which matters.
Yeah, and I think like having a good relationship as much as you can with your suppliers, with your manufacturers, where if you have discovered a one-hit wonder, for example, great, investing in that, ordering more. The first order doesn't have to be the last one. So you can start more conservative before reading the numbers and going deeper.
Absolutely. And also, like you said, working with manufacturers as well. I think depending on where your factory is, they understand the pressures which retailers are going through as well. So you actually have a lot of room to negotiate. Don't just take their MOQ at face value. Don't get sucked into a deal which you don't know if you're going to be able to sell through that in the next 90 or 100 days. Because if there's any doubt, you're going to be stuck with that for a little while if you over order. But the other thing as well is to make sure that even with this, you still need to be investing into your brand, into your storytelling, into your quality, to make sure that you are continuing to give people a reason to come back and buy from you as well. So I think this is going to lead to a much healthier fashion industry because there's going to be less cash tied up in dead stock. But it also means that we can't lose sight of doing the basics really, really well either.
Absolutely. And I think like to round it all out, to me, this sounds like we are prepped for a big 2026. Everybody's sold off their stock during Black Friday. We don't have anything too unhealthy going on in the back end, and we're ready to go.
Yeah, look, I hope that is definitely the case. I'm prepared that 2026 will hopefully be a better year than 2025. With much less volatility in the market. Obviously, we're past the tariffs now, and who knows, those tariffs may be overturned as well if what I'm hearing is correct. But we'll see what 2026 holds. Either way, it can't get any worse than this year.
Touch wood.
Famous last words.
So Next week, Mal, you're going to do a recap and maybe some predictions for the listeners.
I will. I'm going to be doing a recap of the top stories from the year and maybe touch on a couple of predictions. When Alex returns from Japan, we'll be covering off a full slate of episodes, covering off a lot of different crystal ball things, looking at the economy, looking at customer experience, and looking at a number of different areas which we think are going to be moving the needle for brands in 2026.
Exactly. Can't wait.
All right, that's all we got time. Hope you've had a fantastic year and a very successful peak and gifting season, and we'll be back next year. In the meantime, keep innovating, keep growing, and keep selling.
I'll see you next year.